I want a cut in tax, or NI, or both.
We hear from the recent Tory voters voicing their backing for lower rates and who it seems have the ear of the Chancellor. But the backdrop, more blows to another key government plan as it's repeatedly defeated in the House of Lords over small boats and Rwanda. Also tonight. Gang rule in Haiti, the armed bosses taking on the government after a massive prison escape which freed thousands. Putting back on the ballot, the reprieve in America's highest court giving an election boost to Donald Trump. The Hamas attackers accused of rape and sexualized torture that may still be going on in an official report to the United Nations.
There was fans that would message, or so-called fans that messaged in saying that he shouldn't be playing for this club or be captain of this football club.
Far from the beautiful game, the campaign targeting this British Jewish footballer as we see data revealing the increase in anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's coming up in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Hello there, good evening. The political wisdom holds that the public wants the government to prioritise public spending over cutting taxes. Why then did the Chancellor again today indicate that he plans to reduce taxes in Wednesday's budget, albeit in a responsible way? A panel of voters who chose to back the Conservatives at the last election may reveal why. They've told us by a 3-2 majority that their priority is to see taxes lowered. In a moment, we'll hear how those hopes may be realised. But first, our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, has this report.
I would like to see something that would save me some money.
More money staying in our pockets.
I want a cut in tax, or NI, or both.
These are the voters the Tories want and need to win back. This online community voted Conservative in 2019, now telling Sky News what they want from the budget. So many demands, but one big problem.
We have no money, so I'm not really sure that Jeremy Hunt can do very much at all.
The Chancellor may need to manufacture a miracle, and even that won't satisfy everyone. Making a pre-budget visit to a factory with a clear message, don't expect too much.
So we do want to move to a lower taxed economy, but we're only going to do so in a way that is responsible and recognises that there are things that taxes pay for, that we couldn't cut taxes by borrowing. We'll do so in a responsible way. But if we can spend money on public services more efficiently, then that will mean less pressure on taxpayers.
It must be quite emotional for you. Yeah.
This could be the last chance for the Prime Minister to dig his party out of its political hole. So there will be some tax cuts coming on Wednesday, likely to national insurance, and rows in government over whether to cut public spending to pay that bill.
There we go. Bingo. There we go.
Labour knows there's little money to spend and are determined to paint that as a Tory failure.
Whatever Mr Hunt announces, it won't make up for 14 years of economic failure under this Conservative government. They claim the economy has turned a corner, but they've driven it into a dead end.
The people in the building behind me know that Wednesday's budget needs to be a game changer. Yet, Jeremy Hunt is proposing tax cuts when polls suggest that a majority of the public want public spending increases. Why? Well, Sky News voter panel explains. It's a group of 2019 Tory voters, many of whom have now abandoned the party. But amongst that group, a majority want tax cuts.
When pushed, our panel say they'd prefer tax cuts over spending increases by a majority of 2-1. The government is listening to these people.
I'm sick of paying the government all my wages. It's ridiculous. All they do is waste my money.
Throwing more money into the public sector won't improve the services. It would just encourage even more waste.
I think income tax needs to have a cut to it because middle earners are being dragged into that higher tax bracket.
Last autumn, Jeremy Hunt's big gamble didn't move people like this. This week, can he win them back? without pushing the rest of the country away. Sam Coates, Sky News, Westminster.
Well, our political correspondent Rob Powell is in Downing Street tonight. So, Rob, we heard there in Sam's report what Conservative voters from the last election may want. What are they likely to get as it stands tonight?
Well, Anna, tonight I'm told that Wednesday's budget is pretty much done. And yes, all the indications are that there will be tax cuts. I think if we went back 6 weeks, the man in number 11, the Chancellor, may well have been focused on cutting income tax. The problem is that costs more and money is tight. The political advantage of it would have been that it benefits pensioners, benefits people with investment income. And so as well as appealing to those 2019 voters that you saw in Sam's piece, it also appeals to traditional Tory supporters. The money isn't there, though, and that's why national insurance is more likely. But to get to a 2p cut there, Jeremy Hunt will still have to try and find some extra money. And that's why the hints that we're getting are of a possible cut to overall levels of public expenditure, public services spending in the years into the future. Now, it's not a perfect analogy, but this is a bit like pulling money out of future pay packets in order to buy stuff that you want now. It's not necessarily bad or wrong, but it only works if you make sure you've got enough in order to meet your needs and foot your bills in the years to come. And the verdict from many economists is quite simply that the government won't, especially because of the ballooning costs of things like defence, healthcare and pensions. And that brings us back to that central question that our voters panel was chewing over. Do you spend money on tax cuts or do you plough it into public services? The Tories appear to have made their decision. It's tax cuts. So for all the talk of long-term decisions we'll hear this week, it's actually the election and the months ahead that will be shaping much of this week's budget.
Rob, there in Downing Street. Thank you. Well, improving the economy was at the heart of the 5 pledges that Rishi Sunak made to voters last year, including those potentially lapsed Conservatives that we just heard from. But tonight, the government has suffered 5 defeats in its bid to see through another of their priorities, passing new laws to stop small boats. Well, our chief political correspondent, John Craig, is in Westminster, and what you might describe as thumping defeats too, John.
What was remarkable about these 5 defeats was the size of the majorities against the government. 3 of them were over 100 and the other 2 were not far off 100. The biggest defeats the government has suffered in the House of Lords since Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister. You have to go back to 2021 and a big defeat in a row over sewage being dumped into rivers. But there were rebels here on the Tory side, big beasts from the John Major years, Kenneth Clarke, John Gummer and Douglas Hogg, along with Lord Tugendhat, who is the uncle of the current Security Minister, Tom Tugendhat, and a 92-year-old hereditary peer, Lord Eccles. The Archbishop of Canterbury weighed in. He voted against the government, as did other bishops. These amendments that were passed tonight are all about challenging the government's claim that Rwanda is a safe country, and also they want to give the courts more powers to challenge that. Here's a flavour of some of those huge defeats for the government tonight.
They have voted contents 274, not content 172. So the contents have it.
There have voted contents 200.
So there you have some of those votes being announced. Now, what happens now is there are more votes in the Lords on Wednesday. Almost certainly there'll be more defeats. Then the bill goes back to the House of Commons 2 weeks today on the 18th of March. The Commons, of course, will overturn these defeats, and then it comes back to the Lords the next day, the 19th, for that great parliamentary ritual, ping-pong, where it goes backwards and forwards. Now, the government will hope to get this bill through before Easter onto the statute book and get some of those flights going to Rwanda. But this is holding things up and making the government's task more difficult.
John Craig, thank you. The elected government in Haiti is under threat tonight from what is effectively a group of gang leaders after a weekend of violence on the streets. One of them, known to the country as Barbecue, spoke to our chief correspondent Stuart Ramsey last year, warning against any foreign intervention. Well, tensions have been escalating since the assassination of Haiti's president in 2021. Much of the capital, Port-au-Prince, was already under gang control, and over the weekend, gangs overran 2 of the largest prisons, including the National Penitentiary, allowing thousands of inmates to escape. Here's Stuart Ramsey's report.
Even by Haiti's standards, this is chaos. A deadly and violent gang-orchestrated uprising against the authorities. It's basically an attempted coup. The storming of 2 prisons and the mass breakout of thousands of its inmates has sent shockwaves through the country. Cells are now empty. Bodies are still inside the prison compounds. But some prisoners have not left. They say the breakout was lethally dangerous.
It was a very difficult situation last night. There was a riot in the prison and our lives were at risk. What we needed to do was shelter ourselves because there are a lot of shots and we were afraid for our lives.
The violence on the streets has forced people to gather up belongings and look for safer areas to wait for things to calm down. The gang violence has spiked because the Prime Minister, Ariel Henry, is finalising plans for a peacekeeping force to come from Africa to Haiti. A collective of gangs is led by Jimmy Chirezia, known as Barbecue. He says the gangs are on the people's side and against the government.
Men with weapons are not your enemy. Arrest Ariel Henry and you'll see how these weapons are not to cause any harm. They are symbols of our freedom.
Last year we spent a day with Barbecue in his territory in Port-au-Prince. He is an out-and-out gangster, but sees himself as a sort of Robin Hood, who is always in danger. He warned at the time that any foreign intervention here would lead to more violence.
But if they try to resolve it with guns, I think certainly many people in the slums will die, and they will kill mostly innocent people more than the guilty ones.
The truth is, the Haitian security forces and the civilian government are ineffective. To all intents and purposes, this entire country is now controlled by a federation of gang bosses. It's arguably a world first. Stuart Ramsey, Sky News.
We're used to America's politics being divided, but today the country's Supreme Court delivered a unanimous boost to Donald Trump's re-election attempt. All 9 of the judges, including those appointed by the former president's opponents, ruled that it was wrong that he had been excluded from the ballot in one state. It comes as voters in 15 states get to vote to choose their nominees tomorrow. And our US correspondent, James Matthews, is in one of them, Virginia. And James, Colorado, the state related to this Supreme Court action, said this was an effort to get an insurrectionist off the ballot. Donald Trump, meanwhile, called it a big win for America.
It's certainly a big win, Anna, for Donald Trump because he remains on the ballot. He is still deemed electable. Colorado's top court had ruled that he couldn't be, that they wanted to drop him from the ballot because he was an insurrectionist. America's top court overruled that, the Supreme Court in Washington, D.C., ruling that that wasn't a matter for an individual state, that was a matter for Congress. So good news for Donald Trump. He stays on the ballot in Colorado and elsewhere because there were other states already in the queue had the result in the Supreme Court gone the other way, in the queue to block Donald Trump's path. He has reacted today to the decision. This is what he had to say.
I think it will go a long way toward bringing our country together, which our country needs. And they worked long, they worked hard, and frankly, they worked very quickly on something that will be spoken about 100 years from now and 200 years from now. Extremely important. Essentially, you cannot take somebody out of a race because an opponent would like to have it that way.
There you go, one obstacle removed in the way of what Donald Trump hopes will be the path back to the White House. There are others, of course, most immediately Super Tuesday. It's a big contest, a pivotal day in the race to be the Republican presidential nominee. You'll remember Nikki Haley is challenging him. She is some distance behind if she does well tomorrow when more than
12 states will cast their ballots. If she does well, then she may be back in the race. That could complicate things for Trump, although that is unlikely. It's very possible that he will be confirmed as the Republican nominee next week.
Full coverage, of course. James, thank you. A United Nations envoy has said there are reasonable grounds to believe that Hamas committed rape and what she described as sexualised torture during the October the 7th attacks. There are also reasonable grounds, the report says, for believing it may be ongoing. The UN envoy on sexual violence was speaking as hostage families wait to see if a ceasefire deal can be reached between Israel and Hamas to allow their loved ones to be freed. Our Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkle spoke to one of them.
It's 150 days exactly since Ziv and Gali Berman were taken hostage by Hamas from Kfar Aza, the kibbutz near Gaza, where the family lived. 150 long days since the twin brothers were last heard from.
They are very strong. They have the ability to brush problems off of them. They are very humorous. They are in hell.
Liran Berman believes the Israeli government is doing all it can to bring the hostages home, but the wait for news has taken a toll.
I'm not the best husband, I'm not the best father, but I'm doing whatever I can to keep myself focused on the release of my brothers, and I will treat myself after they will be here.
There is a push to get a deal by Ramadan, which starts in 6 days' time, but the days are passing with little movement.
Technical talks are ongoing in Cairo at the moment, but Israel hasn't yet sent a delegation to the Egyptian capital because they say that Hamas have not given them information that they've asked for about whether some of the hostages are alive or dead. As for the chance of a new deal in the coming days, it kind of depends who you speak to. Some are more optimistic, others are urging caution.
A few days ago, the European Commission announced it will resume funding to UNRWA, but the Israeli military released what it claimed are new allegations of a UN employee involved in the October the 7th attacks.
The United Nations has released a report saying that it has found convincing information to believe that Hamas committed rape and sexual violence against Israeli women on October the 7th, and that the hostages could be subject to the same treatment still.
I am of the strong opinion that this finding does not in any way legitimize further violence, but actually reinforces the need for an urgent ceasefire.
Rockets were fired from Gaza into the Israeli town of Sderot today. It's a sign that Hamas isn't defeated and is still putting up a fight, almost 5 months into this war. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News, in Jerusalem.
Well, we know that America and Israel have been increasingly at odds in recent weeks over the situation in Gaza. Both President Biden and his vice president have warned Israel that it needs to do more to help Palestinian civilians. Our data and forensics correspondent Tom Cheshire has this assessment now of what is needed.
Is that direct US criticism already stirring Israel into action on aid for Gaza? Well, the Vice President, Kamala Harris, was especially blunt, saying the Israeli government must do more to significantly increase the flow of aid. No excuses. Well, this is what had been happening. Now, before the war, 500 trucks used to enter Gaza every day. That obviously stopped with the attacks on October the 7th, but then aid did come in with that ceasefire. It has started to peter out, even though there was that International Court of Justice ruling saying Israel should allow it. Now, today, the Israeli government said that 277 trucks had entered Gaza on Sunday. That's this big jump at the end, and it's certainly the second highest figure since the war began. And this is what that convoy was carrying. Food and shelter equipment are the biggest deliveries. Getting aid into Gaza is tricky. The UN has blamed Israel. Israel has blamed the UN. But it's a convoluted process. Most aid comes into Al Arish port in Egypt. It's then taken over to the Israeli border at Nitzana, where the goods are checked for contraband. Then they return to Egypt. The trucks go onward, some to the Israeli crossing at Kerem Shalom, others on the Egyptian side over to Rafah, and once they're through, the goods are unloaded and distributed through Gaza, although very little is making its way to the north. And there's another factor here, a breakdown in civil order, with trucks being overwhelmed. This video verified by Sky News, emerged this weekend. We've seen several other incidents like it. The UN had warned about this even before the convoy disaster that left scores dead last week, saying in some places it simply wasn't safe to deliver supplies because, quote, desperately hungry people were ransacking trucks. And one way around all those problems was this, distributing aid from the sky instead. Jordan and the US carrying out joint airdrop operations. But it is largely a symbolic message of their frustration with the Israeli process on the ground, because it is nowhere near enough. In Gaza, 500,000 people are already on the brink of food catastrophe, a technical term which is defined like this. Starvation, death and destitution are apparent. So 38,000 meals are not going to make a big difference. Beyond that, 2.2 million face a food crisis or worse. That big jump in aid trucks yesterday needs to be sustained if any of that is to change.
Tom Cheshire there. A man has been charged following a fire in Kensington, West London, which left 13 people needing hospital treatment. The Metropolitan Police released body cam footage of their officers attempting to get residents out of the 5-storey building. Wesley Guillaume Farias was charged with arson with intent to endanger life.
Order, order. Will members wishing to take their seats please come to the table?
George Galloway was greeted by silence from fellow MPs as he was sworn in, following his victory in last week's Rochdale by-election. He spoke outside Parliament afterwards and was criticised for comparing Israel's military campaign in Gaza to the Holocaust. France has become the first country in the world to include a woman's right to abortion in its constitution. This evening, huge crowds gathered in the centre of Paris to celebrate. President Macron brought forward the legislation in response to the tightening of abortion laws in the United States. On the 10th of February, a Russian strike on a Ukrainian depot in Kharkiv sent millions of gallons of burning fuel flooding into the streets of a local neighbourhood. Kharkiv is Ukraine's second largest city, with a pre-war population of nearly 1.5 million people. But its location in the east of the country, close to the front line, makes it the target of repeated attacks by Russia. The result of this strike saw 15 homes set ablaze, wiping out entire families. Our international correspondent, John Sparks, has been to Kharkiv and reports on the fate of one of them.
In Ukraine, another calamity marks the night sky. Another disaster in this war-torn state. But there's nothing typical about this. On February 10th, the Russians hit a fuel depot in the city of Kharkiv. 1 million gallons of diesel and gasoline poured into the streets, flowing like lava into a nearby neighborhood. 15 homes were set ablaze in a blistering river of fire. Tatiana Putetina lived at number 32 with her son Grigory and his family of 5.
The children were asleep. There were 3 of them, 7, 4 and 10 months old. They just didn't have time to get out, to gather the children.
Tatiana was visiting a relative on the night of the attack. Her loved ones had stayed at home.
By 9 in the morning, I'd already returned. When they were recovering the bodies, they didn't show them to me. They were so badly burned.
Her son was a builder. His wife, Olna, worked at the prosecutor's office. They'd spent the past 2 years trying to keep their 3 boys safe. Oleksiy was the oldest, with Mihailo in the middle. Pavlo was still a baby. Their grandmother led us inside the remains of their home.
They found my son here. This is where he lay. It looks like he was looking for a way out. Here in the bathroom, that's where she was. Olna was holding 2 of the children close to her chest.
This was Tatiana's home until a couple of weeks ago, but the structure is gone, and so is her life as She knows it. How do you come to terms with that? The funeral was held 3 days later, with Tetiana and other family members stricken with grief. 10-month-old Pavlo was buried with his mother. But when these images were posted online, she was mocked by some, Russians, she said, accusing her of pretending.
When we were mourning at the cemetery, I held the coffin. There were comments like, "What an actress. She plays her role well."
The fuel depot was still smoking long after the attack, and Kharkiv's streets were thick with a black sticky residue. We saw workers trying to patch up the pipes, but there are things here that will never be repaired.
The stench will linger for years. That smell will stay. And it has affected the atmosphere too, because there were huge clouds of smoke. It was terrible.
More than 10,000 civilians have been killed since the beginning of the invasion, and more than 500 of those are children. It is the pitiless product of a senseless war.
Of course, it's hard. I come here every day, sometimes multiple times a day. I'll come here, walk around the house where they found their bodies. I'll shout, I'll cry, and then I'll leave.
It is a journey that she will continue to make on her own. John Sparks, Sky News in Kharkiv.
And finally, it is far from the image of football as the beautiful game. The demands made on a former Championship football club for its British Jewish captain to be removed from the team. Joe Jacobson of Wycombe Wanderers has needed additional security as a result. He's spoken to our sports correspondent, Rob Harris.
This is the adulation Joe Jacobson usually enjoys as Wycombe Wanderers captain.
Scrambling! Joe Jacobson!
But being one of the few Jewish players in professional football has made him a target of abuse. With his safety threatened after expressing concern about Palestinian protests since the October 7th attacks on Israel.
The club got sent some emails and letters demanding I apologise, demanding that if I didn't, they would barricade the gates at Adams Park on a match day. So there was some plainclothes security that were kind of watching out.
Were there attempts to get you thrown off the team?
There was fans that would message, or so-called fans that messaged in saying that he shouldn't be playing for this club or be captain of this football club. And I think that those things weren't there before. I think since October these things are happening.
It's being experienced in grassroots football too, with cases of teams refusing to play against Jewish opposition. And in the professional game, there's been a surge in anti-Jewish abuse involving fans. Figures obtained by Sky News from anti-discrimination group Kick It Out found anti-Semitism increased 5 times in the first half of this season compared to the previous year. In the same time, cases of Islamophobia quadrupled. As overall, all faith-based discrimination in the professional game, grassroots and social media trebled. Israeli player Liel Abida is set to leave Celtic just months after signing a new contract amid Palestinian activism at games by their fans. In England, the failure to light the Wembley Arch in Israel's colours left the Jewish community feeling a lack of solidarity from football.
They set the precedent years ago with doing things, and I think the one thing that Jewish people have always said is why is it always us? Why are we different to anyone else? And I think that was a prime example that when it came to what happened on October 7th, then they weren't willing to stand up to that.
The hope here is apologies from the FA are met with action by punishing anti-Semitism and ensuring football becomes safer for Jewish players and fans. Rob Harris, Sky News, High Wycombe.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by the Sun's chief political correspondent, Jack Elsom, and the Guardian's political editor, Pippa Crerar. And among the stories we'll be discussing, this on the front of the Eye, its headline, Tory tensions as Hunt and Sunak wrestle over this crunch budget coming up. Right back with that and more in just a moment. Well, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, our top stories. The Chancellor has again indicated he will cut taxes in Wednesday's budget, but intends to do so in a responsible way. The House of Lords has inflicted 5 defeats on the government over amendments to the Rwanda Bill, although Downing Street says it remains committed to sending flights to Rwanda this coming spring. And the US Supreme Court has ruled in favour of Donald Trump, ending the attempt of several states to remove him from presidential primary ballots. Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with The Sun's chief political correspondent, Jack Elsom, welcome to you, and The Guardian's political editor, Pippa Crerar, welcome to you as well, Pippa. Lots to talk about, obviously, tonight. So let's check out the front pages then, as ever. Kicking off with the Tory tensions as Hunt and Sunak wrestle over crunch budget. That's the headline for that paper. The Guardian carries a warning from health professionals that NHS funding faces the biggest cuts in real terms since the 1970s. The Times is reporting there's division in the Conservative Party for plans of a new definition of extremism. France must do more with our millions to stop small boats, reads the Daily Express, with an interview with the former Home Secretary, Dame Priti Patel. The Daily Mail reports there's outrage over the Church of England's plans to pay reparations for its historic links to slavery. The Metro has a story about the housing crisis, reporting MPs have been told the deaths of 55 children and babies have been linked to inadequate conditions in temporary accommodation. On its front page, the Financial Times reports Apple has been fined more than €1.8 billion by Brussels for stifling competition from rival music streaming services. The Sun interviews the Princess of Wales's uncle, Gary Goldsmith, where he criticises Prince Harry. And Bigfoot lives in Torquay, declares the Daily Star. A reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you listen to our guests. Let's head straight to Jack and Pippa. Budget, let's kick off with that, shall we? What is the music? What do we know? Starting with the wrestling. Again, I'm sure there was a wrestling headline last week. But anyway, Pippa, where are we at?
So we're expecting the budget's going to be on Wednesday, and it is potentially the last big fiscal event before the next general election, even if the general election is in the autumn. It depends, of course, on the timing of it. So there's a lot of pressure on Rishi Sunak to use this opportunity to get his party out of the doldrums. We had yet another poll today which put the Tories at a record low of 20 points, in 20% in the polls, which is lower than they've been thus far. I think it was with Ipsos Mori. So this is a rare moment for them to try and close ground with Labour. And of course, they're coming under huge pressure from the Tory right to introduce tax cuts. Tax is obviously at a record high, 70-year high, the tax burden. And there's a real feeling that if the Conservatives are going to go into an election campaign and argue that they are the tax-cutting party, they need to put their money where their mouth, or our money where their mouths are at this election. But there's not much cash available. The Chancellor has limited fiscal headroom, and then he's looking at the prospect not just of lots of tweaks here and there, but also potentially of future spending cuts to make the sums add up.
Yes, he gave an interview to the Sunday Telegraph, didn't he, in which he said he'd had the last of the OBR's forecasts, and he said the figures had gone against them. In other words, the headroom is small, so maybe managing expectations. But the idea seems to be to rob Peter to pay Paul, whatever Paul and Peter end up being, of course, both in terms of future spending on public services, but also in some fiddly bits, which he seems to want to do to raise money, which looks like tax-raising mechanisms in order to tax cuts elsewhere, which presumably the Tory right will not like. So can you make sense of what I'm saying? That'd be helpful, Jack.
Yes, it seems that Jeremy Hunt is engaging in a bit of fiscal jiggery-pokery, shall we say, and he's been sort of at his desk in number 11 for the past few days. He desperately wants to get about 2p worth of tax cuts on one of the two big revenue raiser headline rates, be it income tax or national insurance. It looking more likely potentially national insurance. To do that, with the £13 billion of headroom he's got, he had to keep about £6 billion in reserve in case things go haywire. And so what he has to do, actually, is look at much smaller taxes, potentially to raise stuff like a tax on vapes, such as targeting second homeowners, such as targeting air passenger duty, non-doms, to be able to then make the sums add up and the OBR give him a green tick when he goes for those big headline revenue raises. And it's a bit of a comms crisis, really, isn't it? Because, you can raise all these other taxes, but it's much easier to say, OK, leave these taxes to the side. Actually, look at this. I've cut 2p of national insurance, a further 2p to the autumn. And I think that he's hoping that people will forget the other, the Peter as such, and just focus on the big attention-seeking pool those headline rate reductions.
And, you know, the whole idea of national insurance, we've already had that. It clearly didn't land because it hasn't shifted the dial. So why bother with that again? We'll come on to the Times and the other coverage on fuel duty in a moment, because I know that's your paper's great thing. But, you know, why national insurance? Why is that beneficial?
Well, the difference is, of course, between the two is that if you're genuinely trying to target tax cuts at working people, who obviously have borne a lot of the extra costs that have arisen in recent years, but also, of course, are the engine of growth, ultimately, of the economy, then national insurance is the way to do it. And that was the conclusion that the government came to in the autumn statement when it said that, when they announced that 2% cut in NI. And all the signalling since that point, really, the moment when Jeremy Hunt went to Davos and on multiple occasions since then, has been suggesting that there's more to come on that in particular. However, there's been pressure from some around Rishi Sunak to focus on income tax cuts instead, because even though that obviously it benefits everybody, it is more expensive, but there is regarded as being a sort of a bigger political benefit. And as you say, rightly, Anna, at the autumn statement, lots of Tories felt that they didn't get credit for cutting NI, the amount that they did. And even if that was just the beginning, as Hunt has indicated, they need to be able to capitalise politically from whatever the announcements are in this budget. And crucially, Rishi Sunak, if you remember back to the leadership election campaign against Liz Truss that he lost, he had a pledge then, if he became Prime Minister, to reduce the basic rate of income tax from 20p to 16p. So he's clearly keen on that particular cut. Is there a world where we see that 2% or even more being on that income tax cut? I think there is.
Because for workers, the great irritation has been what they call fiscal drag, is that you get a pay rise because you will have had a pay rise, hopefully, because of inflation rates, and that takes you into another tax band, the tax thresholds, and they have not budged. And that's you know, one of the great efforts, isn't it, for tax campaigners?
Yes, and that's what's really angering workers, MPs and the Tory right, because like you said, the National Insurance 2p cut, the autumn statement, while, yes, they could say, realistically, they have put money in people's pockets, overall, the tax burden went up because of these so-called stealth taxes. However, I'm not sure we're going to see any movement of that really at the budget, just because they are too expensive and they're too valuable for the Treasury at the moment. And also, try telling somebody, oh, actually, you know, these sort of stealth taxes, these thresholds are actually going to stay the same. It's not an easy sell, is it? Whereas if you can say the headline rate of something is coming down, it's much easier to sell to the electorate. And so I think that's probably what we're going to be looking at on Wednesday.
I've got stuck, haven't I? There's loads on this list. Should we proceed? Anyway, just quickly as well, because I know it's your campaign, your paper's done a lot about this. The Times is going on the top as well. Hunt poised to freeze fuel duty in a budget boost for drivers. I mean, that's quite an expensive thing to do, let's be honest about it, isn't it?
It is. This would be the 14th year that fuel duty has been frozen, so it's not going up with inflation. We also expect Jeremy Hunt to keep in this 5p. It's meant to be temporary cut in 2022, just for a year, but it got extended last year. We expect it to be extended this year as well. While it is, you know, fairly expensive, £5 billion, which would go into the Treasury, actually it doesn't really affect the so-called OBR calculations, because it's meant to be temporary. So they assume it's going to go up every year, but because it's not, it doesn't actually eat into his headroom, exactly. But it is a win for drivers, and yes, I think a win for the Sun as well.
Yeah, it's on the front of the Financial Times as well. And then The Guardian talks about the backdrop of a lot of this, which is, you know, the public services creaking, straining, and the headline here, doctors issue a dire warning as the NHS faces its biggest budget cut in 50 years.
Yeah, and, I mean, Jeremy Hunt is considering cutting billions more from public spending plans post-election to pay for some of these tax cuts that we've talked about in the budget. But economists, I think it was last week, were suggesting that could take 20% out of the budgets of what's called unprotected departments, so things like justice, home affairs, local government. The protected departments, of course, are things like defence, schools, generally the NHS workforce. But what the story we've got on the front of The Guardian suggests, these are new figures from the very respected think tank, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, and it suggests that actually there's going to be a £2 billion gap in funding for the £2 billion cut in funding for the NHS in England, which could result in things like staffing numbers, even pay, and the services that the NHS provides to patients being cut just, as we go into a general election. And already, as we've seen and heard from many in the NHS, including those who are striking, feeling that the NHS is already on its knees before such a cut would even come into force.
It's a critical area, and a critical area for voters as well, isn't it? I've got the Times, and let's just show you the lead story. Tories divided over a new definition of extremism, but up the top there, Hunt poised to freeze fuel duty in a budget boost for drivers. So we'll watch and wait, obviously, for Wednesday. In the meantime, let's go to what happened today in Parliament. We always knew that Rwanda would be a rocky road for the Lords, and so it is proving. Jack.
Yes, so the Lords have inflicted 5 defeats on the government this evening, which is actually quite a lot. However, I don't think in the long run it's going to make a material difference. We always expected them to water down this Rwanda Bill. These sort of 5 amendments which they've tacked on to the Safety of Rwanda Bill tonight have all been in the guise of the court should be able to say that Rwanda is not a safe country. Well, that is the entire point of the bill, right? You're saying in law that Rwanda is a safe country, or the Rwanda Bill should comply with domestic and international law. Well, at the moment, the government is hoping that there will be no challenges from international and domestic law. And so they're going to, until Wednesday, keep watering down this bill and then send it back to the Commons next week, where I think we can imagine all of these amendments to be stripped back out and kicked back to the Lords.
Let's see your paper while you're talking as well. Actually, you're making the point here, but carry on.
And don't forget that when the Commons passed this last year, lots of people on the Tory right really did hold their nose and vote for it because they said, OK, we're going to go for this, but actually we're not going to stomach any more watering down of this bill. And so if it does come back to the Commons, I think we can basically say Tory MPs are going to say absolutely no way are we taking any of these amendments. You send it back to the Lords in all your form. And actually, we've even heard Rebel peers today say, in the end, after this arm wrestle, we had the ping-pong, but the Lords will cave and give in to the elected Commons. So it delays it a little bit, but actually the substance doesn't really change.
Yes, we can't show your paper, I don't know why, but it says 40 to a boat, 300 a day, as the Lords fight the Rwanda plan. And the Metro as well, similar, 300 migrants reach the UK on a day that a child is lost. So it's still, the point is it's still a critical issue, I suppose.
It's still a very live issue, and of course, obviously, a lot of the opposition in certain seats is not just about those people coming across in small boats. It's also about where asylum seekers are housed. Often in constituencies, hundreds of miles away from the sea. And James Cleverly, the Home Secretary, has talked about that the Rwanda Bill is only part of the solution to securing Britain's borders, as he puts it. And the Express has got an interview with Priti Patel, who was, of course, the former Home Secretary, talking about France needing to do more. This is on a day in which actually a customs partnership has been struck with France. Not much detail about it. But the suggestion is that this agreement will see Britain working more closely with France and going after the supply chains to stop the boats reaching the French coast in the first place. However, there's already holes in it. It's just France that they're dealing with. Presumably, this is actually an EU issue when it comes to supply chains, and you need to deal with other countries. And there's no proper data sharing at the moment of criminal information or additional UK police resources to work with Europol. So I think there's going to be lots of questions about actually how much this new agreement is going to do, and probably pressure for them to reach further agreements with other European countries as well.
OK. Still, got lots more to talk about. Anyway, lots more coming up in the next part of our programme, including the front page of the Daily Mail. Vicars in uproar, the paper says, over Church's £1 billion slavery reparations. We will discuss that and more after this.
So we got some of the most amazing British classic dishes which we were doing at the Oscars. So we got a beautiful lobster fish and chips, bit of tartar sauce, and we've even put the classic British fork, which the Americans love.
Yeah.
Naturally.
So this is all food for the after party?
Yes, so the governor's ball. So they go to the actual Oscars, they get their award, and they go up the stairs to the governor's ball, which they'll get these dishes.
OK.
We've also got the prawn cocktail roll, which is served in a soft brioche, sort of 3-biter.
Amazing.
A little bit of caviar for the
Yeah.
Oscars.
Yeah.
So, last of all, we've got the amazing Wagyu roasted Yorkshire pudding, roast beef, creamed horseradish and watercress, and it is absolutely amazing. So hopefully they like it.
Oh, I'm sure they will. How do
Yeah.
you decide on the menus? Or which one should I try first? Can I try?
Oh, you can try one, yeah. Probably the prawn cocktail roll to start, yeah.
Amazing.
There you go.
Thank you. I'm going to have... Do you want some?
Go for it, yeah.
you want a prawn? Yeah, go on then. I'll have a prawn then for you.
There you go. So it's a little bit of Mary Rose sauce.
OK.
Keeping it as classic as possible.
Thanks.
Hopefully they love it, but let's see.
So, but, I mean, they've got the fancy frocks on and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, everything had to be taken into consideration.
Noticed I said the caviar for me.
Oh, yeah, the big piece. Yeah, well, why not? Why not?
And how many covers are you doing? Like, what's the scale of this?
It is actually enormous. It's around 2,000 people. And there's like a huge, huge queue. And I'm looking, I'm like, surely that's not the queue for this stall. Because there's like 10 stands within this governor's ball. It's like ballroom. And there's just queues and queues of people. But we were quite popular because we were doing the British food. And the Americans love fish and chips and all that kind of thing. So it was super, super, super popular. Couldn't keep up, obviously. But, you know, carried on, carried on. There's only 3 chefs on that front desk. So...
Which big names made it to your stall? That's
great question.
Wow, there were so many amazing people. And I mean, for me, Brendan Fraser, obviously he had won the Oscar last year, and he was so lovely. Lady Gaga was amazing. This is the
Wagyu,
best one.
isn't it?
Yeah, this is the Wagyu beef.
Yeah.
And we roast the Yorkshire pudding in a little bit of Wagyu fat, so it gives it that sort of shine and crunch. It's a lot more sort of luxurious than normal.
Right.
But it's delicious.
And do they come back for more? Do you have to say you've already had yours?
They do, and some people will be asking, can I have extra beef, and being cheeky, but that's all good.
So welcome back. You are watching the Press Preview. With me once again, The Sun's chief political correspondent, Jack Elsom, and The Guardian's political editor, Pippa Crerar. Welcome back to both of you. Let's go to the front of the Daily Mail then, shall we? Jack, why don't you kick off? Vic is in uproar is how the headline starts, so take it away.
Yeah, so this is a report which the Church of England commissioned into its slavery past and what it can do to atone for that. And originally this report suggested that £100 million would be enough to suffice to sort of pump that back into black communities, black education. However, we now see that actually £1 billion is being suggested by groups linked to anti-slavery. And the Daily Mail has gone in on a bit of a backlash to this. So they have vicars saying how it would be anti-Christian, it would spell the death knell for the Church of England. The idea being that £1 billion would absolutely cripple the coffers of the Church of England, as rich as it may be. £1 billion seems an awful lot, and they have vicars here tonight saying how it would be anti-Christian and suggested it was motivated by a death wish for the Church of England. They do have other recommendations in this report, for example, apologising for the Church of England's denial that that God was made in the image of black people, which seemed to be a lot easier to implement. The question now is whether or not the Archbishop of Canterbury goes along with this and coughs up that £1 billion.
And the indications are, well, I don't know, he was quite committed to be in the House of Lords on the Rwanda Bill, I suppose, wasn't it? But anyway, what's the suggestion then?
The indications are that they view this as the beginning of a process and that they will ramp up the amount of money available. I mean, the Mail and others suggest that, you know, parishioners are going to be less likely to put their hands in their pockets and support local churches. But don't forget, I mean, the church is an investment arm worth 10 billion quid. It's not poor. There are other ways of getting this funding beyond asking people at a local level to support. And I think the intention is to ask wealthy families and benefactors if they would be prepared to be willing to donate to help the church pay for this fund, which it believes is essential because it has past links to slavery. It benefited financially over the years from slavery. And this group, which was led by descendants of enslaved Africans, has decided that this would be one of the best ways for it to start to address some of those historic links. Archbishop of Canterbury, of course, apologised for the links in 2022, and this is just the latest step on this process that the Church is going through.
OK, we'll see what happens with that. In the meantime, let's go to The Sun. A celebrity Big Brother exclusive. Princess Kate's uncle, Gary Goldsmith, has hit out at Prince Harry. Anyway, the timing of this is interesting, isn't it, for the Prince and Princess of Wales, given what they are, you know, going through as a family right now?
Yeah, very chaotic and probably quite upsetting time for the royal family.
So the uncle's gone in the celebrity Big Brother house. I suppose I should...
Tonight, yes. Kate Middleton's uncle, Gary Goldsmith, has entered the Big Brother house. And I think a lot of people were thinking, oh, my God, this is going to be the worst time possible because he could lift the lid on Kate and Will's life, he could spill some secrets. However, it seems that rather than doing that at all, he's called her absolutely perfect. He's launched an absolute drive-by on Harry and Meghan Markle, saying they're all on the make, saying they're only out for themselves, hitting out at their sort of cash-raising ventures. And so actually it seems that he's going to be turning his fire on Harry rather than Kate.
OK. Jack and Pippa, lovely to see you both. Thank you. See you for the 11, of course. Here's the weather, though, now.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, turning drier and more settled this week and milder, but there will be a chilly but largely frost-free start tomorrow with fog patches through central and southern parts, rain near the east coast and blustery showers over Ireland and the Channel. Eastern Britain will see the early rain largely clearing through the morning, perhaps lingering over north-east Scotland and East Anglia, while the north of Ireland and Northern Ireland will see showery rain clearing through. Most places then look fine, but expect a few showers, mainly in the south and the northwest. Touch milder, less windy in the southwest.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Coming up in Sky News at 11, the Chancellor hints again he is preparing to cut taxes in Wednesday's budget, but at what cost to public services? Back with that and plenty more in Sky News at 11.